Hey everyone, Ken Ingalls here, back with another salary cap video for the Green Bay Packers. Today what I'm excited to talk about is a very popular question that I've been receiving, and that's what are the Packers going to do with Nate Hobbs for the 2026 season? As we know, Hobbs was one of their key free agent signings for 2025 and really had an up and down type season. And looking into 2026 is really kind of a question mark for what his role is going to be on this team, if any. So what I want to do is go over all the options that the Packers have for his contract, what that looks like from a math and contract perspective, give my thoughts and opinions on kind of how things might shake out. But first, I want to kind of dive into his contract and take a peek at really what that looks like. First of all, what I'll say is that this contract looks like a prototypical Green Bay Packers veteran contract, right? If I were to try to diagram out or like model something, this is kind of taken right off the page. What you see here is that first, he has a very large signing bonus that's all paid out in year one, $16 million. And that's spread over the entire life of the contract, up to 5 years. But this is a 4-year contract, so it's $4 million per season, 16 divided by 4. That all gets paid out in year one, leading to this high cash value of 18.2. Now, when I look at what sticks out, when I look at the future years, year two, so 2026, the year that we're entering, half or less than half of the value of year one. Very, very typical Packers structure, with then slight increases the remaining years. There are workout and per game bonuses filtered in every single year. That's expected, classic Packers. And then when we go up to base salary, again, very low base salary in year one, a little bit higher year two, and then starts ballooning in the later years of the deal. And usually, if it's like a 4-year contract, there's typically 1 or 2 roster bonuses sprinkled in the middle years. And so Hobbs has that one roster bonus of $6.25 million in 2026. Again, very, very classic Nate Hobbs or Green Bay Packers type contract for Nate Hobbs. Now, the focus of a lot of the conversation is really going to be around this $6.2 million roster bonus. And this is really good on the agent for making sure that Hobbs had this included in his deal, because it forces decision making. It forces action by the Green Bay Packers. We all saw last year in 2025, Jair Alexander, right? That situation dragged on. There was everyone was kind of expecting the Packers to move on from Jair. The Packers were kind of holding on, trying to see if they could get something back in a trade for him. And because there were no triggers, there were no deadlines in that deal, it was just kind of base salary amounts. The Packers could take their time, and they held on to Jair past free agency and into OTAs and coming up in the training camp. That won't be the case for Nate Hobbs. They're going to have to make a decision very early. That roster bonus is due the 3rd day of the league year, and what the league year, that's March 11th for 2026, and that's when free agency officially starts. That's when trades are allowed to happen. A lot of new rules kick in, a lot of timings and things start March 11th. So that's when the NFL calendar kind of starts. So by the 3rd day, it'll actually be Friday the 13th, that Friday of that week. That's when the Packers, if Hobbs is on the roster at the end of that day, this bonus gets paid out if they don't do anything to the contract. It's not an option. They can't decide not to. They can't decide not to pay it, and he still, is on the roster and just gets paid less. It's not how it works. If he's on the roster, it triggers, and it's the Packers' liability, meaning, so it's not like a week later they could then trade him and that bonus would move to the other team. If a trade were to happen, it would need to be before that date, because as soon as it triggers, it's now sticks with the Packers and it cannot move in any way, shape, or form. It gets paid out and hits their cap in 2026, 100%, completely unavoidable. And that's what I mean by like triggers or deadlines included in a deal. So this is very good for Hobbs, not necessarily great for the Packers, but good on the agent for making sure that there's this forcing function in the contract. if I move over here and take a look at like how the contract is laid out with some calculations about in-season dead caps and future caps and trades, we can take a look at all the options that I have kind of listed out for what the Packers can do on Hobbs' deal. First, let's just talk about the release. Right now, Hobbs has a cap number of $12.8 million. And the reason why that's on a nice, clean, round number is because the per game bonuses are lower than the $600,000 that he has every year. And just a reminder, per game bonuses only count at this point in the year based off of the number of games he was active the previous season. So we know Hobbs missed a bunch of time in 2025. So the calculation looked at how many games he was active last year. I might actually have that up. Let me take a look. Nate Hobbs. He was active 11 of 17 games. So that's where of this 600,000, 388K is likely to be earned. And this is the amount that counts on the salary cap today. And then there's another 211,000 that if he plays all 17 games would also hit the cap this year. So like in previous videos, I discussed how, there needs to be kind of a little bit of a piggy bank for these, opportunities where veterans play longer based off of these bonuses. But going back to the contract, really what we're looking at in the kind of this first or all scenarios, but his cap number is 12.8 million. His dead cap for the year or remaining on the contract in total is 12 million. And what does that mean? That's the amount of money that's already been paid to Nate Hobbs that the Packers haven't counted on their salary cap. So that's, in this case, it's very clean. It's just his signing bonus. Remember, we had that $16 million signing bonus, $4 million a year is how it counts. So if they were to move from him, the Packers now need to pay it off, right? And so that's what these 3 remaining signing bonus years are, 12 million. Now, if you look at that, if they were to release him, it's only a cap savings of 838K. It's not very much. What I find interesting is if you look at this chart down here, this is lifted straight from the CBA, and it details the minimum allowable salaries for players based off the number of years they are in the league. So a zero experience player, meaning rookie, even an undrafted rookie, undrafted free agent, is going to be making a minimum wage of $885,000, which is more than the savings that the Packers would get from moving on from Nate Hobbs. So right off the bat, we need to say moving on from Nate Hobbs is not a salary cap related decision. It would be something, performance based or how he fits in on the roster or expectations, right? It's not going to be one of those giant cap clearing moves at all. Post June 1 release, before I go into the details, just as a caveat, note that the Packers actively avoid these. Jair Alexander last year was released after June, but the Packers made efforts, extra steps to make sure that they didn't get the preferential treatment from the post June 1 release. They don't like them. They try and take, all their medicine right away. So I don't really see these happening, but I will go over what that means if I kind of scroll over to the right. And I look at this post June 1 cut field. So really the immediate savings, or I would say not the immediate savings, the 2026 savings would be 8.8 million. So literally adding $8 million onto his pre-June 1 cut. Because how it works there is going back to the signing bonuses. How it works is with the post June 1, only this $4 million would count in 2026, and these future $4 million chunk that'll hit next year. So that's where that additional $8 million comes from. It's not free money. It's not found money. I feel like a lot of times people are quick to look at like cap websites and they'll just see, pre-June 1, post-June 1, and they'll just make a call right there. Be like, oh, well, it's $8 million. Of course you would do that. Well, you also have to pay that $8 million on the cap next year. Also, just because you do a post June 1 cut doesn't mean that you get that money, that cap savings right away. The rules are, if you designate a player as a post June 1, they need to remain on your roster, even though they might be gone. You have to count them on your roster, and you have to count their salary on your roster until after June 1. And then the release is kind of processed for cap purposes. So that money's not even freed up for free agency. So if the idea is, oh, we need all this extra money to be, liquid in free agency, it's really not benefiting anything. So again, they sound and look really sexy on paper, but in reality, the Packers don't do them. And at the end of the day, it all kind of nets out to the exact same amount of savings anyways. And the Packers kind of like to do it all at once anyway. So I don't really see a post June 1 scenario playing out at all. Okay. A trade is a potential. The math sorts out exactly the same. The only reason a trade would be different is if there were amounts that were guaranteed. Now, that's with the caveat is if the trade were to happen before that roster bonus is due. If the roster bonus gets paid, and I'll talk about that maybe now with a post June 1 scenario. Well, it doesn't even need to be post June 1, really. Let me back up. Okay. If they trade after, so first they would have to get past March 11th. He would have to be on the roster when the league year starts because trades are not allowed before March 11th. There's a 3-day window where they could trade him, and the Packers would gain that $838,000 in a trade. If he were to be traded at any point after the March 13th, which is the third day of the league year when that roster bonus is due, you now have to add $6.2 million to the dead cap. The Packers would eat that. It would not move at all to a new team. So they would eat that trade. They would eat, they would eat the roster bonus. Now, 99% of the time, I would say that that's just not going to be a feasible thing where the Packers would eat a roster bonus and then trade the player. We did see Kenny Clark last year had a very substantial roster bonus and a workout bonus that the Packers paid prior to trading for Micah Parsons. You do those things to get a Micah Parsons type player. With Nate Hobbs, it's interesting. I could see a world where the Packers look at Nate Hobbs and they see a player who's kind of like their backup slot defender. And they say, to us, he might not be worth $9 million cash as kind of a backup role because he's really not used well as an outside slot corner, despite the team really trying to force him into that spot. It was very clear, performed much better in the slot and was signed to be a slot. But if you take away that roster bonus and you eat that as the Packers, what's left is you have a base salary of $1.8 million. Then you got a per game bonus and a workout bonus. You're now looking at a 1 year, $2.5 million cap hit that you're trading away. Team might be interested in that. I kind of look at that as like buying a draft pick, right? Where you might not be able to convince a player or a team to take on that roster bonus, but if the Packers eat it, you might be able to get something for it. So that's a potential option. Now that I kind of backed up with that, if they were to do the same type of thing in a post-June world, you can't designate post-June 1 trades. The trade actually has to happen post-June 1. It's not like the cuts where you can, on paper, assign two of them. It would be the same thing. They would have to eat that bonus, and they would take, another 6.2 million dead this year, and that 8 million in the future would also hit next year. But maybe they can get a decent pick for him. I don't know. Restructuring's on the table. Again, reminder with restructure isn't any type of pay cut or anything. Literally, if you read the contract language, Nothing changes at all. The timing, how they get paid, their bank account is literally 0% affected. It's taking this roster bonus and taking this base salary and dropping it 0 for the bonus down to the minimum for the base salary, calling it a signing bonus, and then now you get to spread it out over the now 3 remaining years of the deal. If they do that with Hobbs, it's $4.5 million. If they do what I call max void restructures, where they add those fake void years on, you can now spread that same amount of money over 5 years. And now you got 4 future years you're dumping money into. It goes up to $5.5 million. Those are options, absolutely, for the Packers. And I can absolutely see them doing that as kind of an early way to get some money for free agency if they're really trying to play around in that market. Pay cuts are interesting, again, because 2 things. The team needs to be willing to release the player, Nate Hobbs, if he says no. And then, so you look at Nate Hobbs, he's making just over $9 million in cash. He could probably make that in the open market if you were to straight release him. Like, he'll get a signing bonus and get a minimum salary. He'll probably make that money. It really all depends on like if they want to keep him around. But the second thing is, I don't think I've shown this to you guys yet before. Let me hide my camera, hide my checklist. This is my kind of working depth chart that I have for the Packers for 2026. You know, I have guys on here like Elton Jenkins and Rashawn Gary, who I think are going to be long gone. But right now they're under contract, and it doesn't have guys like their exclusive rights guys who I think are going to be back, but those deals haven't gone through yet. Look at the corners. All right. I have 6 corners listed. They might not even keep 6, but Carrington Valentine, Shamir Bartholomew, Nixon, Tron Herring, Jalen Simpson, Nate Hobbs. I've got Nate Hobbs as the starting slot just because he's the only one with the corner designation that really plays slot. You know, we all know Javon Bullard up here at safety plays the majority of his snaps at slot corner, if not also on the field playing safety, you know, when not in the slot. So, but if you look at the corner room, even if they were to add their 2 exclusive rights guys in Kamal Haddon and Bo Melton, who, by the way, has 0 career defensive snaps, every single other player than Nate Hobbs is not under contract past this season. Hobbs is your only player on the roster beyond this season. I don't know if the Packers can go into free agency and the draft with literally no future with no future plan. Because all these guys, if they were to get rid of Nate Hobbs, move on from him, there's no one around, right? And is that too much to have to figure out long term, especially when you've got defensive line questions, you've got offensive line questions, you've got corner questions just for this year. Now you got to try and figure out, like, how do I have some sort of stability for the future? I don't know if they can absorb moving on from Nate Hobbs. But what I will say, in the last video that I had, I talked about Aaron Banks. I think that the Packers are better equipped to move on from Nate Hobbs than they are from Aaron Banks, which is because I think in this season, you got Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine. One of those is absolutely going to probably be your starting outside corner, maybe both, depending on who they bring in. There might be a key free agent or maybe a high draft pick that is in the competition to be starting as well. And then you're going to have 1 or 2 of these guys listed here, or the exclusive rights guys, maybe another lower draft pick or free agent. You know, that's going to be your corner room. But again, that's a lot of work to also then have Nate Hobbs. And especially if Javon Bullard goes down, you don't really have any on this roster who's playing slot. Maybe Keyshawn Nixon, but again, if he's your starting outside corner, then what? So there's just a lot of question marks, obviously, around corner in general for the Green Bay Packers. So I'm very curious to see where things will land there. I'll come back here. Here's my checklist. Here I am. So maybe, so going back to pay cut, maybe, extend. No, like he's got 3 years left. That's just not happening. But I put it, for all the lists that they can do, and do nothing. Do nothing is on the list. I do think that do nothing is more of an option than people think, but just because if there's already talk about maybe moving on from him in the future, if you do restructure, every dollar that you push out and save this year becomes a cost in the future. It becomes more expensive in the future. So, doing nothing, if they're kind of trying to hedge and prepare for maybe moving on, maybe they just eat that bonus this year, don't spread anything out, and they take it all at once. But going back, now that we've gone through all the options and thinking about Nate Hobbs and looking at the list, I'm curious what you guys think about what the Packers will do with Nate Hobbs. Of the two, of Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs, which is super unfortunate that the two top free agent signings from 2025 now are the biggest question marks of returning veterans on this team, in my opinion, and the two most important needs on the team in terms of overall room need: cornerback, offensive line depth. Very disappointing free agent signings, very unfortunate free agent class. Curious though what you think about Nate Hobbs. If I had to say something, I think he's much more likely than not to remain a Green Bay Packer in 2026. I think we're going to know by the start of the league year what they're going to do with him. I would not be surprised if the options are a restructure or do nothing. I'd be a little surprised if it was a straight release, and I'd even be more surprised if it were a scenario where they eat the signing bonus, eat the roster bonus, the $6.25 million roster bonus, and then buy a draft pick by then trading a smaller contract to another team. That's usually not how the Packers operate, but I'd be very curious to see and watch them pull it off. But again, looking at that depth chart, the cornerback room needs a lot of work. I expect them to do a lot of work in the cornerback room, regardless of Nate Hobbs' situation with the team. I've been burned by expectation in the past. I think last year I said they're going to do it. They signed, they had Nate Hobbs, who was supposed to be the guy, and then a 7th round draft pick. They haven't drafted a corner higher than the 7th round for 4 years running, if at all. So, but I think it's a time. I think we're going to see some movement at corner, and I'm curious to see how you guys think it plays out with Nate Hobbs. So let me know what you think, and I will talk to you guys next time.